And I'm joined now by the former Trump Attorney General, Bill Barr. His first reaction since we have seen these new charges. And thank you so much for being here, Mr. Attorney General. I mean, you've now read through this indictment. Do you think it's a strong case?
Yeah, I think it's a legitimate case. I think, unlike the document case, it's going to have issues of proof. It's a more complicated case. And I think there are some downsides to it. I think there were reasons not to bring it. I've said before, I'm a little concerned about the slippery slope of criminalizing legitimate political activity. I'm worried about moving in that direction. And I'm also worried about bringing this case and the divisiveness that it will bring by highlighting the double standard. Because at the same time this case is being brought, the department appears to have dropped the ball on the Hunter Biden investigation. It's going to be very hard to persuade many Republicans that this isn't political.
We'll talk about the Hunter Biden investigation, but I mean, when you do look at the indictment, do you think it's something you would have brought?
I don't know if I would have approved the indictment, but in the sense I may have exercised discretion and not gone forward with the case. I'm also concerned about having this case going on during the election and diverting people's attention from the issues in the election. I'm also worried about what the impact is if there are acquittals during the campaign. But as a legal matter, I don't see a problem with the indictment. I think that it's not an abuse. The Department of Justice is not acting to weaponize the department by proceeding against the president for a conspiracy to subvert the electoral process.
Which is what Trump's attorneys are saying. And they're also saying that he was just exercising his First Amendment right here. Do you think that's a valid argument in your view?
No, I really don't think that's a valid argument because, as the indictment says, they're not attacking his First Amendment right. He can say whatever he wants. He can even lie. He can even tell people that the election was stolen when he knew better. But that does not protect you from entering into a conspiracy. All conspiracies involve speech, and all fraud involves speech. So, free speech doesn't give you the right to engage in a fraudulent conspiracy.
The other thing that they're arguing, including John Lauro, Trump's new attorney, to me last night, was that they were simply asking the former Vice President Mike Pence to pause on the counting of votes. Mike Pence pushed back on that today, said that's not what they were asking him to do.
Let's be clear on this point. It wasn't just that they asked for a pause. The president specifically asked me, and his gaggle of crackpot lawyers asked me to literally reject votes, which would have resulted in the issue being turned over to the House of Representatives, and literally chaos would have ensued.
How strong of a witness do you think he'll be against Trump if he's called?
Vice President? I think he'll be a very strong witness. He has the highest integrity. He's behaved with dignity and propriety all the way through this.
You agree that they weren't just asking him to pause the counting of the votes, they were asking him to overturn the election?
I wasn't around, but from what I read in the indictment, there was a discussion, and the president himself stressed that he would prefer him just to accept the votes in the panels that were pro-Trump, that it wasn't a question of just buying time.
Yeah. The other argument that we're hearing is about who Trump was listening to at this time. Trump's attorney, John Lauro, said this of John Eastman.
Mr. Trump had the advice of counsel, Mr. Eastman, who was one of the most respected constitutional scholars in the United States, giving him advice and guidance.
He's citing John Eastman as this constitutional scholar, but we know in the indictment, it says Trump was ignoring your advice, that of other senior Justice Department officials, Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, the director of national intelligence. Is it a credible defense to say he was just listening to John Eastman?
I don't think that dog is going to hunt, as you say. First, as to people who had some knowledge of whether or not there was fraud, everyone was telling him that the election was not stolen by fraud. And then as to the issue of what he could do legally at that point, he went through all the he wouldn't listen to all the lawyers in the department in various departments or the White House that had those responsibilities, or his campaign. He would search for a lawyer who would give him the advice he wanted. But I'm not even sure you would characterize what Eastman said as advice. I mean, it'd be interesting to see, but I interpret some of what he was saying essentially was, well, you know, it's unclear here, and you can make this argument. I'm not saying the courts would accept it and so forth. And you act on that at your own hazard. Also, I don't think this defensive advice of counsel is going to go forward, because I think the president would have to get on the stand and subject himself to cross-examination in order to raise that, and he'd also have to waive attorney-client privilege.
And what would happen if he got on the stand?
I think it would not come out very well for him.
Do you think it would hurt him?
Oh, yes, yes.
Why do you think that?
Well, because I think he'd be subject to very skilled cross-examination, and I doubt he remembers all the different versions of events he's given over the last few years.
Do you think he knew that he lost the election?
Do I personally believe that? Yeah, at first I wasn't sure, but I have come to believe that he knew well that he had lost the election. And now, what I think is important is the government has assumed the burden of proving that. The government, in their indictment, takes the position that he had actual knowledge that he had lost the election and the election wasn't stolen through fraud. And they're going to have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt.
Which is a high bar, of course.
That's a high bar. Now, that leads me to believe that we're only seeing a tip of the iceberg on this.
You think Jack Smith has more?
Oh, yes. I would believe he has a lot more. And that's one of the things that impressed me about the indictment. It was very spare. And there were a lot of things he could have said in there. And I think there's a lot more to come. And I think they have a lot more evidence as to President Trump's state of mind.
You said you've come around to the idea that you do think he knew that he lost. Why have you come around to that?
Number one, comments from people like Bannon and Stone before the election, saying that he was gonna claim it was stolen if he was falling behind on election night, and that was the plan of action. I find those statements very troubling. And then you see that he does that on election night, and then the evidence that has come out since that, you know, the press reports and the indictment and his lack of curiosity as to what the actual facts were, just leaves me. That's my personal opinion. That's my personal opinion. We'll see if the government can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
You spoke to the January 6th Congressional Committee. Have you talked to Jack Smith's investigators?
I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into that.
Okay. You came out on December 1st. You were there on election night, and you said that the Justice Department had uncovered no voting fraud on a scale of what would have changed the outcome of the election. When you look back on that time period from the election to December 1st, do you ever wish that you had come out sooner and spoken up sooner?
Not at all, because if I had come out and shot from the hip without doing some due diligence and making sure I understood what the claims were and that I knew the facts, and if I turned out to be wrong without doing due diligence, I think that would have been a disaster for the country.
But did
so
you
I
need
had to
that
get,
long to do due diligence?
Well, the allegations kept on changing from day to day and were very frequently specific. You know, a truck driver took so many ballots from here to there.
And you interviewed that truck driver even.
Well, I didn't, but the department
The department did.
Yeah, so I mean, we were chasing down all these things, and I wanted to make sure that the major allegations were looked at and that I had a good sense of what happened. I also wanted to analyze the votes themselves and see, you know, how the voting patterns were in those states. Not only did we not find any fraud of that magnitude, but in the states, and when you actually looked at the votes, they were very clear to me why he lost. He ran as the weakest person on the Republican ticket. Like in Pennsylvania, he came in 60,000 votes below the Republican ticket. So he's losing Republican votes. He lost at least 75,000 Republican votes in Arizona. And so, you know, to me, there was no, and these were the female voters in the suburbs that were Republicans. These were the independents in the suburbs that ordinarily would vote Republican. So I didn't think there was a mystery as to why he lost.
Because it was in areas that he was underperforming with. His attorney predicts it would take 9 months to a year to try this case. Do you think a good, solid defense team could get it done before the 2024 election?
I think it all depends on the judge, and I think my impression is this judge may want to move it along, and so they'll have to be ready to try the case when she's ready to try the case.
But do you think the American people, was it in the American people's best interest to have this adjudicated before the 2024 election happens, before they cast their ballots?
Well, the paramount question has to be fairness to the defendants, the fairness of the process. And I think I think there are arguments to be made both ways as to whether it should be first or whether it should come afterwards. Of course, if he's elected president, then coming afterwards, would be meaningless.
Because you believe he tried to essentially either get rid of it or pardon himself. Do you think this entire indictment for January 6th could have been avoided? Is this something of his own making?
Yeah, I don't think that this is an issue of his victimization. I think he brought this on himself. This is one of the reasons I oppose him for the Republican nomination, because he has this penchant for engaging in these reckless acts that create these calamitous situations and then undercut the cause he is supposed to be leading. And this is a perfect example of it.